On December 31, 2026, the current framework for Indonesian resource exports reaches its final day of operation, as the entire network consolidates into a single choke point. This date marks the mandatory expiration of the private export model, replaced by a centralized state gatekeeper known as the BUMN export. This shift is being executed through Government Regulation 24 of 2026. The policy targets the nation's highest volume commodities, the raw materials that thrive Indonesia's position in the global supply chain. This regulation represents a physical, logistical application of Indonesian constitutional economics. By exerting direct control over these resources, the state is using its market position as a lever to force domestic industrial growth. To understand the legal basis for this level of market intervention, we have to look at the foundational documents of the Indonesian state. The government's justification is rooted in Article 33 of the 1945 Constitution, highlighted here in the regulation's explanatory notes. It dictates that branches of production critical to the state and the public must be dikuasai oleh negara, controlled by the state. The 2026 policy interprets this mandate as a requirement to prevent the value of raw materials from being captured exclusively by foreign private entities. This move towards sovereign resource maximization prioritizes state-coordinated value capture over the simple volume of raw exports. Regulation 24 is the physical activation of a legal principle that has existed since the nation's founding. The regulation applies to a specific set of physical assets. Currently, millions of tons of raw materials are extracted annually from open-pit sites across the archipelago. The law classifies these assets as commoditas SDA strategis, or strategic natural resource commodities. Article 2, Section 3 of the document specifies the initial targets for this regime. Coal and ferroalloys represent the foundational energy and industrial materials designated for state control. Kelapa sawit, or palm oil, is the agricultural target, included for its massive land use footprint and global market share. However, Section 4 ensures this list remains dynamic. The scope of the law can expand at any time. Through interministerial coordination, the government has the authority to add any resource to this system as global market conditions fluctuate. This creates an extensible dragnet, giving the state the legal mechanism to control any material it deems vital to the national economy. The core operational mechanism is the BUMN export. In the current model, private producers sell their inventory directly to global markets. Under Article 3, Section 1, this direct route is severed. Every export of a strategic commodity must now move through the state enterprise. The BUMN export functions as a central broker, either purchasing the goods outright or acting as the mandatory sole intermediary for the transaction. This leads to a major shift in pricing power. Article 3, Section 2 explicitly states that the final selling price is determined by the state enterprise. This means the government, rather than the producer or the global buyer, dictates the international market price for Indonesian strategic resources. Section 4 adds a secondary layer of control. The state enterprise has the legal authority to determine the transaction margins. This translates to a direct capture of revenue. The state enterprise takes a percentage of the global sale price before the remaining funds are distributed back to the domestic producers. This converts private logistics into a state revenue generator without requiring the nationalization of the extraction companies themselves. The state is using this massive export monopoly as a mechanism to drive a specific nationwide industrial transformation. Article 4, Section 2 provides the criteria for an exemption, allowing certain producers to bypass the state gatekeeper. Accessing this bypass requires the producer to enter into a binding agreement with the government that satisfies 3 specific requirements. First, the producer must commit to mandatory domestic investment. Second, they must fulfill local divestment requirements, ensuring a percentage of equity is held within Indonesia. The final requirement is domestic refining. No raw materials can leave via this route. They must be processed in-country to add value. This is the core of hilirisasi, the strategy of limiting raw exports to force the development of local industrial supply chains. By setting these terms, the state uses market access as a trade-off, compelling private companies to build Indonesia's industrial base. Manually monitoring millions of tons of resources across the massive Indonesian archipelago is a logistical impossibility for a single government entity. The enforcement mechanism is outlined in the notes for Article 7, which call for the integration of several national monitoring systems. the state export gatekeeper is being hardwired into the country's primary digital infrastructure. It draws real-time data from CEISA for customs tracking and INA Trade for trade information. Financial and material flows are monitored through CMO-DIS for foreign exchange and MOMS for mineral production levels. This creates a digital monitoring network where compliance is tracked automatically across every stage of the supply chain. The resulting dual-track system presents a clear choice for any entity extracting Indonesian resources. They can either pay a financial premium to the state via the export monopoly or commit their capital to building the country's industrial processing capacity. Under President Prabowo Subianto, this policy represents a deliberate shift in how Indonesia interacts with the global economy. December 31, 2026 remains the absolute fixed deadline for this sweeping industrial transition to be fully completed and enforced. Indonesia is moving beyond passive resource extraction, utilizing its domestic wealth to redefine the terms of sovereign resource management.